Yeah, I can't. It's not letting me add the file.
Okay, there we go. We are live on YouTube.
Liz, can you have a go at loading that?
So we're looking for the facilitation guide, are we?
Yeah, sorry, for some reason it won't let me access my files when I try to add a file.
Let's see if I can just paste it in there. No, it's not letting me paste it either. I'll need to download it and then upload it
hang
again.
on. I think I'm right now. One moment, please. Oh, yeah, it's coming. It's just loading, says she with great hope.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you, Marina.
There will be questions that'll come through during the session, so you don't have to worry about that. Marina and I will keep an eye on it, and we'll let you know if you need to ask one of those questions.
Yes, because we do a bit of moderating along the way, because if there's a question that's, unhelpful, we just ignore it.
We have the power.
Even though there's no such thing as a dumb question, some people ask dumb questions.
Okay, so there's 1 minute to go. So those of us who are not in part of it are going to turn off our audio and video. Once it says webinar recording, once it's started, Carolyn, if you want to just, count to 10 and then start, then we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Any last minute questions? Everyone happy? Yeah.
Good luck, Carolyn and everyone.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Working with Children and Young People Impacted by Coercive Control and What Practitioners Need to Know. This is the final in a series of 6 webinars that have been delivered over the last 12 months. My name is Carolyn Jones, and I am the Principal Solicitor of the Harm Practice at Youth Law Australia. We're a national child and maltreatment legal service. I have the privilege of being your facilitator for today's session, and I thank all the facilitators who've gone before in this series of webinars. Before we begin, I want to pay deep respect and acknowledgement to Aboriginal people, colleagues, organisations and communities. It's a privilege to be on the Gadigal country of the Eora Nation here in Sydney. I acknowledge all Aboriginal people, including elders past and present, and acknowledge the strength and wisdom that stems from Aboriginal communities being the oldest continuous culture in the world. We on the panel also acknowledge all the victim survivors of domestic and family violence, including any attending today, and the variety of ways that victim survivors resist violence using overt and covert ways and methods. We recognise the lives taken because of choices to use violence and the need for systems to make profound changes to uphold the safety and dignity of women and children, as well as other victims. We also acknowledge the victim survivors who have led and advocated for the criminalisation of coercive control. And so I would like to welcome all of you today. We know that many of you have attended the previous webinars in this series, and we welcome you back. We also welcome those of you joining us for the first time today. So why are we here? On the 1st of July 2024, a new coercive control offence commenced under Part 3, Division 6A of the Crimes Act here in New South Wales. There have been some offences emerging in other states and territories. So it's definitely something that we're seeing spread out across the country. But New South Wales was the first. Section 54D of the Act prescribes an offence of abusive behaviour towards current or former intimate partners where an adult engages in a course of conduct of abusive behaviour that's intended to coerce or control the other person. This is commonly referred to as the coercive control offence, and it's punishable by up to 7 years imprisonment. I will talk more about the legislation shortly, but not too much. CCWT, in partnership with DCJ, have developed coercive control training to equip New South Wales practitioners with the knowledge and skills to identify and respond to coercive control. To date, over 2,800 practitioners have attended the training, and we're adding to that number today. Overwhelmingly, participants want more information about how coercive control impacts different communities and the intersections of that harm. This series of webinars is in response to that feedback. So a tiny little bit of housekeeping. The session today runs for 90 minutes. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for later access. Closed captions are automatically on. If you don't want to see those, you can turn it off at the square on the bottom of the screen where it says CC, which is closed captions, not coercive control. You can submit your questions via the Q&A function at any time, and we will address them during the dedicated Q&A session if we have time. At the end of the session, we will provide links to resources and encourage you to complete a short feedback survey. Today's webinar, Working with Children and Young People Impacted by Coercive Control, What Practitioners Need to Know, enables us to hear from experts in the field and to discuss the legislative changes in New South Wales and explore the ways that practitioners can support victim survivors. We have some objectives for the session, and we hope that by the end of this session, you will be able to recognise the specific experiences of coercive control for children and young people. We also hope that you can build more familiarity with the New South Wales coercive control legislation and legal considerations that are relevant when you're supporting children and young people. We also hope to clarify your understanding of the experience and impacts of abuse on children and young people, and to identify language and explanatory concepts to use in supportive responses with children and young people. We will also outline how practitioners can respond effectively and supportively to children and young people as individuals and within family contexts. And we will embed a response to children and young people which is impacted by coercive control within a child rights perspective. For today's session, I am wearing two hats. I will be facilitating, but I'll also just shortly provide a presentation on some of the core components of the legislation and how that is relevant to children and young people. The session will focus on two specific groups of children and young people: those who experience coercive control in the context of family violence, and those who experience coercive control in the context of intimate partner and peer relationships. And we will balance both of those experiences throughout the session. We will first hear from Jess Stone, who is a National Youth Advisor with NAPCAN, alongside many other roles, focused on youth participation and child safety. Then we will hear from Gina Johnson from Barnardo's, who brings her substantial experience across the early childhood and social welfare sectors in Western New South Wales. And then we will hear from Jo Campbell, who's the General Manager at DV West, and will be sharing some of her experiences in supporting families where there have been experiences of coercive control. We will then open the floor for an audience Q&A. So please feel free to submit your questions via the chat or the Q&A tool throughout the session. Any questions we don't get to, we will have a Q&A resource developed post-webinar, and we'll make that available to everybody. So please pop your questions in. Finally, we will close with some key takeaways, resources that you can use moving forward with your client groups, and information on upcoming webinars and where to find these webinars. We will also ask during the session that people consider language, and including in the language you use in the chat. Language is a crucial aspect of all of our work. We ask participants throughout the session to reflect on their language and its power, as well as challenging others' language where needed. We would also ask you to always remain open and curious in your learning. We will also just flag a content warning. Discussing coercive control can be deeply sensitive and potentially distressing. If at any time you feel overwhelmed, please prioritise your well-being and leave the session or take breaks as needed. There are support services that you can reach out to, such as 1-800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732, which is a 24/7 number. And similarly, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander crisis support that you can access through 13 Young is also a 24/7 service, and that's contactable on 139276. Okay, let's get going. I'm going to change my hat to presenter, so there may be just a slight delay while I work out the tech side of things. I have to share my screen, so just bear with me while we get that sorted. Okay. All right. Okay. Right. Okay. I'm hoping that everybody can see that information. We seem to have lost some slides. Okay, apologise for that. Okay. We will start with an acknowledgement of, oops, I apologise, having a little technical hiccup. Okay, we will start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are working today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the webinar. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing culture and connection to the lands and waters of New South Wales. We also acknowledge all victim survivors of domestic and family violence, including any attending today, and the variety of ways that victim survivors resist violence in overt and covert ways. We recognise the lives taken as a result of choices to use violence and the need for systems to make profound changes to uphold the safety and dignity of women and children. We acknowledge the victim survivors who have led and advocated for the criminalisation of coercive control. We note that some people may have worries about the new laws, and that's an opportunity we will have to explore these together, including ideas for where the law might be reformed in the future if there's concerns that it's not perhaps inclusive of all groups that may need assistance. There's a slide about me. As I said, I'm working at Youth Law Australia. We provide a national legal service to work with children and young people experiencing harm, including coercive control. And again, just a reminder about your well-being. Please take care as we work through this material. And I would also like to note for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that the webinar may discuss or refer to Aboriginal people who have died. All right, the information in this webinar supplements the digital pack and the additional resources attached to the presentation. We strongly encourage you to review all available materials. Due to time constraints, we won't be able to cover all topics related to children and young people, but feedback is always welcome about additional training that might be of assistance. We also wish to acknowledge the profound impact of coercive control on children and young people, regardless of age or developmental stage. Coercive control tactics significantly impact their development, behaviour, emotions, and relational well-being. And this transcends all cultural, religious, and gender intersections and ages. Children of all ages are impacted. So, what is coercive control? This is when someone repeatedly hurts or scares another person to control them. It's domestic abuse and it can cause serious harm. It is an ongoing and repeated pattern of behaviour, and it happens in different types of relationships, even if the coercive control offence doesn't apply to that particular relationship. It's deliberate and it is wrong in any relationship, and it is an assault on a person's autonomy, liberty, and equality. Examples of behaviour that could be coercive control, and these are relevant particularly to children and young people, includes isolating an individual from friends, family, and wider society. It could be withholding or controlling access to resources, including money and including, for example, wages that children might be earning. Psychological control and manipulation, sometimes that also includes gaslighting. Threats and creation of a climate of fear, including threats towards children. So, for example, a threat to harm a child if somebody doesn't do something that the person using the coercive control wants. And controlling or withholding access to healthcare, education, or employment opportunities. Coercive control also occurs, as has been flagged a little bit already, within the intersection of many factors. So this can be race, age, sexuality, and sexual identity. It can be based on your location. It might be linked to disability, culture, and community, and can look very different in each relationship, which is why it's so important that people are engaging with all the different training modules that are available, as often clients are falling across many different intersections and needs. This slide is an example visually of how children experience coercive control. It was influenced by the Duluth model, the power and control wheels that many of you will be familiar with, and was created by Bernardo's through an Empowering Kids project. Yes, we've got the link way there at the bottom, and it's worth having, if you haven't seen that already, it's worth taking some time to actually look through that and recognise the way that children and young people are using their voices and experiences to help adults understand what it feels like and looks like for them. It's very important that children and young people who experience domestic violence and coercive control are acknowledged and seen, and that we are actually listening to their voices and allowing them the opportunity to provide an account of what's happened in their own words. Those opinions and experiences must be taken seriously, and then children and young people, wherever possible, to be supported to get, the help they need, and to be able to talk about it without feeling embarrassed or perhaps scared that they have raised something that might, for example, get a parent into trouble, and that they're asked about anything that might happen next. So if you're working with a child, to think, okay, what can we do to keep you safe? What's the next step? That they're given an opportunity to participate in decision-making that impacts them. This slide talks a little bit more about some of the specific experiences for children and young people in this space. They have the right to be heard as individuals. They're not simply a witness or exposed to coercive control, though they will be witnessing harm to adults in their life and exposed to it. They also have their own victim survivor experience simply by being in that household and being exposed to that dynamic. They're harmed by it. They often actively resist it. The impact of experiencing coercive control being used by one parent against another is profound. It is common for children to experience significant psychological harm. This can range from things like anxiety, depression, and trauma disorders. It can then spill out into just developmental difficulties, and this can continue into adulthood. I'm sure that all of you working with children will have been, listening to children with experiences of things like bedwetting or sleep disorders or changes in their appetites and eating patterns. They may have aggressive or dysregulated behaviour. They may be using drugs and alcohol or other at-risk behaviours as a way of self-medicating or distracting from the things that are happening in other parts of their life. It can also look like emotional neglect if they're living in a home where a person is using coercive control, including post-separation. Apologies, sorry. They can be used by perpetrators to extend the coercive control, and this is something which, for those of you that work in spaces like family law in particular, you might see children and young people being used to spy on the other parent and report back. At times, children might be used to transport devices for tracking or monitoring an adult person being targeted. That can be, as we know, it might be just providing the child with a new device that they take into the other parent's home, or it might be using toys. This can be used to find somebody's new address. And it could also, I think one thing that I know we've had to think about very carefully, and I'm sure some of you are the same, is that if you're doing a video call with a child, to think about what the other parent might be able to see about the home of the person who has experienced family violence and coercive control. And that may give away locations, or it might provide other ways that children can be used to harm a parent. Increasingly, there's understanding of the way that people who use coercive control might sabotage a mother-child relationship in particular. We do see it in other relationships, but particularly that mother-child relationship, that might be by degrading mum and confusing the child, which can seek to, I suppose, in some ways we see it as it reduces the power and the authority that mum might have. So the child is less likely to respect what mum says and follow mum's directions. Sometimes there can actually be children saying really awful things to a parent and denigrating that parent on the instruction or training of the other parent. It can be just about getting children on side and confusing children about what a safe and healthy relationship looks like. Children who experience coercive control can then be at risk of experiencing coercive control and maybe using coercive control in their own intimate relationships. And we also know that children and young people are really less likely to identify tech-facilitated abuse and emotional abuse. I think children are used to adults telling them that they can be monitored to a certain extent, and certain apps like Life 360 and others just get embedded into family culture. If you are worried about a child experiencing the impacts of coercive control, it's important to remember that some of you, depending on your profession and your workplace, may have mandatory reporting obligations, and it is helpful to look to the mandatory reporting guide to have an examination of when you might be required to make a report. It's always important to ask, what ways have you seen somebody use coercive control in relation to a particular child? Has it undermined a mother-child relationship? Has the child been threatened? Have they been encouraged to say mean things and denigrate another parent? Has there been restricted access to a child, so it's hard to actually see how they're going? And has there been things like financial control through the non-payment of child support? So there's quite a lot of things which very much link into standard family and domestic violence practice, but I think it's also just stepping back to reflect on how that may impact children. Okay, this slide just talks in a little bit more detail about some of the things that we can see generally about experiences of domestic and family and sexual violence on children and young people. We've talked about a few of them on the previous slide, and you can see, oh, sorry. So I've just got a little thing flicking over my screen, sorry. So there's some areas of impact around behaviour, which we've talked about. So that can be the acting out, withdrawal, it might be running away. I think we've seen an increase in our work with children and young people who have run away and often aren't really sure where to go because everything just feels hard and heavy. In addition to the developmental stuff that we spoke about, we do know that repeat exposure to family violence and coercive control can impair brain development that from chronic stress and anxiety. Lots of disrupted relationships, lots of impact on bonds with non-offending parents, and maybe then unsafe attachments with peers as their concept of what's a safe and healthy relationship has been impacted. There can be high emotion, and that can appear in any form or all forms, sometimes all at once. Anxiety, depression, anger, shame, hypervigilance. There can also be lots of difficulties engaging with school and learning difficulties with concentrating and just disrupted school engagement absences. Then it can manifest as children just not liking themselves and feeling that they're the problem or that they're bad or that they're just, they're not good enough, they're not okay. And feel like it's their fault. And often that can be a tactic that's used by the person using the coercion and control, is to embed that sense in the child. And then physical health. So I think it's always important to do a little scan with your clients just to check how they're tracking physically, because quite often children in these circumstances have significantly higher rates of ill health, which can be things like rashes or headaches, stomach aches, and just getting sick all the time. So really the most important thing is that it impacts everything in a child and young person's life, and there's often lots of indicators, and we have to work collectively to identify that and to understand what's actually happening for each young person. Okay, on the next slide, now hopefully this will work.
Maya's always been really outgoing at school, but since she started seeing Jay, she doesn't sit with her old friends anymore. She seems much quieter.
Oh, sorry, what's up?
These days. On the weekend, Maya's family went to the beach. They'd always loved going together, but this time Maya said she would have to check with Jay. She didn't put her phone down the whole time to answer all his calls and texts. Jay keeps turning up unannounced to Maya's soccer training. At first it seemed sweet, but she told him she can't talk, and he still keeps showing up every week. These behaviours could be signs of coercive control. Coercive control is when someone uses patterns of abusive behaviour against another person. Over time, this creates fear and takes away freedom and independence. It can include physical and non-physical abuse. Having open conversations about healthy relationships with teenagers can help them recognise coercive control. Make sure they understand that no one has the right to make them feel scared, hurt them, or make them do things they don't want to do. Support is available. Contact 1-800-RESPECT or call the Men's Referral Service.
That short video, which was produced by the Commonwealth Government, was also to show what we flagged earlier, that there is experiences for children and young people experiencing coercive control in intimate and peer relationships as well, and we will discuss that a little further in the webinar. The lived realities for children and young people, this slide has a lot of information. I won't necessarily read through all of it, but it's helpful to just understand some of the key areas. I suspect you will have thought about a lot of these and you will be hearing about it from children and young people. It's good to just remind yourself to be sort of doing a risk assessment that assesses all of these. And I think the digital and social surveillance is probably the highest risk factor that we hear about, the most common. And so I think children and young people are also kind of used to being monitored and don't necessarily understand that that might be something which could be an indicator of coercion or control. Some children and young people actually feel safer with that. And so to untangle that a little bit can be tricky in your work. I think the impact on sibling relationships is a really big space that we need to think more about. It's not uncommon in our work to have somebody identify that a child or a young person in their family is treated better than them. And so we do know that one child might be the favoured child and the other child might be scapegoated, and that in a way is just used to control both the children and the non-offending parent. And sometimes that's just seen as broader family dynamics and actually not recognised. I think a critical intersection is for children who may also be using violence, and this may not necessarily be in a coercive control space. It might be that, for example, they might be bullying a peer at school, and it's very important when you're working with children who've been accused of using violence or a harmful behaviour that care is taken to understand the context in which they might be living or the things that they've been exposed to through adult relationships in their life. And to do that piece of work that helps to provide support in relation to both presentations of experiencing and using harm. There's often complex dynamics that will fall outside a traditional understanding. That's because we tend to look at things from a fairly adult-centric view, and so we haven't necessarily examined as much as we should, and I think this work is now happening about what's happening with coercion in lots of different relationships. And online spaces are particularly harmful, and I know that our speakers will talk to that shortly. This is just another little video that was produced in Ireland. It's only a quick one. So we'll just have a quick look at this as well, about how, in children's voices, about how they've been impacted.
It is shouting, name-calling, crying, and sometimes even punches, bruises and blood.
It gets louder and louder. They don't think we can hear, but we can, even if we're in the last corner of the house.
We're worried that Mum might get killed.
We hope it will pass and things will be back to normal, but we are still scared thinking about when it will happen again.
It's a really bad feeling in our heart. It feels like it's broken. Sometimes we feel it in our bodies too, and our bones start to hurt.
We find it really hard to stay out of it. We try to stop it, but it doesn't work.
It's our job to protect our little brothers and sisters.
Sometimes we are told whose side we're on. We don't like it.
Some adults think children are stupid, but all children have a voice.
Together, we can paint a better picture.
Very impactful, I think, hearing it, the voices of children, and a reminder that they, as we know, they're little sponges, they absorb everything, and so we need to be constantly working together to ensure that they're not exposed to these kinds of harms. The next few slides are just a quick tour, as I promised, only quick, on the legislation. So as flagged at the start, the coercive control offence commenced from 1 July 2024 and is about a course of conduct of abusive behaviours towards a current or former intimate partner. It does capture patterns of physical and non-physical abuse, which is aimed at hurting, scaring, intimidating or controlling, and it only applies to behaviour that happened after 1 July. But if there has been a significant pattern of coercion and control or abuse prior to 1 July 2024, that can obviously be used as evidence in other ways to show the background and context of the relationship. This is just a brief slide which shows you the section in the Crimes Act which outlines when it is an offence. I won't read through that. I'm sure some of you will be well familiar with that section already, but that's the primary section, section 54D, which outlines what is currently a coercive control offence, and this will be, over time, there will be opportunities for this to be reviewed and see if it should be expanded to, for example, apply to other types of relationships. The most important things to note is that it's likely to cause that someone will fear that violence might be used against another person. I think this is particularly relevant to children, and that there could be a serious adverse impact on the capacity of that person to engage in their ordinarily day activities. Okay. The meaning of abusive behaviour is non-exhaustive, so there's a lot of things that could be included. There are some examples that are included in section 54F2 of the Crimes Act. This can include threats or intimidation, behaviour that causes shame, degradation or humiliation. I think, again, relevant to this particular webinar and group is any behaviour that causes harm to a child if the person fails to comply with demands, behaviour that might stop them from doing something or isolates them from family, friends and culture, and also expression of cultural identity and participating in ceremonies culturally and spiritually that are important to the person, and anything that might deprive the person of liberty or otherwise unreasonably controls their day-to-day activities. How the laws are impacting children and young people has various ways. Children and young people can use or experience coercive control in many relationships, like it might be in relation to a parent, a carer, a friend, a partner, a peer. Only young people aged 18 to 25 can be charged with a coercive control offence against a current or former partner of any age. And that's important to know, that their partner can be under 18. Young people of all ages can be the victim of a coercive control offence by a current or former partner aged 18 or older. as just flagged. Children and young people may also be a witness or have an exposure to a coercive control offence. So while they are likely to have their own lived experience of harm at the same time, they may also be required by justice processes to provide a statement in relation to things that they have witnessed or observed in relationships for the adults that are in their household between parents and carers or other family members. And a parent or guardian's use of coercive control against a current or former intimate partner is the main focus of the law. But behaviours used against children and young people can be captured as part of the course of conduct. And we know that the Bureau of Crime Statistics have put out research that talks about the offence to date, and we know that of all of the types of abusive behaviours that fall within the pattern of abusive behaviour, only 6% of the matters that have been dealt with by New South Wales Police have used those provisions around any kind of harm to a child. So it's certainly not the primary space, but it is being recognised, and the work that we're doing will hopefully help police and justice processes to recognise that more. And this is the last slide, which is just reminding people that the coercive control offence is linked to AVOs. So the meaning of a domestic violence offence in the Crimes, Domestic and Personal Violence Act includes the coercive control offence. So the court can make an apprehended domestic violence order if it's satisfied on the balance of probabilities that a person who's been in a domestic relationship with another person has reasonable grounds to fear, or in fact fears the commission of a coercive control offence. There are some other benefits through the change legislation which relate to increased powers for police around investigation and weapons seizure, protection for victim survivors giving evidence in court proceedings, and some powers around allowing victim impact statements. Okay, let's see if I can stop sharing now. Hopefully that worked. Right. Okay, sorry, I think I've missed my timekeeping. Apologies for that. Okay, all right. Now we are moving on to our lovely presenters, and I'm going to first up, hang on, I've just got to find, where are we? Jess, where are you? Jess, we've got you on the screen. Excellent. There we are. Hey, Jess. I do hope that was a helpful summary and sets our tone for the rest of the session. I'm now pleased to hand over to Jess Stone. Jess is a multi-award winning survivor advocate and youth policy consultant dedicated to preventing child abuse. She serves as a youth advisor to NAPCAN, where she works to advance national preventative efforts. Outside of NAPCAN, Jess also advises Origin, the Raise Foundation, the Daniel Morcombe Foundation, and the US Consulate. Jess leads the SDSN's Youth Asia Pacific operations, coordinating youth changemaker groups from Kazakhstan to Korea, and manages the Brisbane Global Shapers Hub, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. Very tired just reading that, Jess. Very impressive. Her recent work includes advising the E-Safety Commission and the Daniel Morcombe Foundation on resources addressing technology-facilitated abuse, reforming the Future Forward Australia's publication strategy, and speaking to youth participation at various child safety conferences across the country. From classrooms to boardrooms, Jess is redefining Australia's approach to abuse prevention. Thank you so much for your time, Jess, and welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Amazing. So now, given your experiences and your current roles, I am wondering if you can share with us what you think is most important in supporting children and young people who've experienced or are experiencing coercive control.
Yeah, and thanks for the question. It's obviously a big question, but what is most important in my perspective is restoring autonomy. As we know, coercive control erodes a young person's sense of autonomy over time. Their choices are monitored or punished, and compliance is rewarded. So gradually, their understanding of who they are and what power they hold shifts. In childhood and adolescence, obviously, we know that these are periods of high neuroplasticity when identity, consent, and relational boundaries are still forming. So this erosion can fundamentally shape how they see themselves in relationships. In my experience, this kind of presents as a pendulum swinging between two internal narratives that are actually kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. So the first narrative we see is the young person kind of taking that autonomy back, and they're saying, I must have wanted it, I must have asked for it, obviously knowing that that's not the case as the adults in the situation. But from their perspective, this is an attempt to regain control in a situation where that control has been taken away. I guess the idea is if I caused it, then maybe I can stop it next time. And research with young survivors has showed high levels of self-blame, particularly where abuse is subtle or normalized. And obviously, this is a very dangerous belief, which reduces help seeking and increases the likelihood of tolerating further harm. And obviously, the second narrative, completely on the other side of things, unfortunately, is I have no autonomy whatsoever. Here we see powerlessness, dehumanization, and boundaries become quite difficult to identify for the young person. They might struggle to name their preferences, their limits, and they might also struggle with their sense of bodily ownership. So in this situation, when choices have consistently been punished, asserting a boundary can feel impossible. Obviously, both of these narratives reflect the disrupted autonomy that the young person is experiencing. So when supporting children and young people experiencing coercive control, I believe we must actively assess how they understand their own agency, whether it fits into one of these two categories or it might be a hybrid or something else. But understanding that agency is the first step, and then restoring that agency becomes the task. So that means offering genuine choices and respecting them. That's important. Respecting them is really important. Even where mandatory reporting or other non-negotiable steps are required, there are always micro choices that we can offer the young person. If something must happen, we need to collaborate with the young person on how it happens, who is present, where it takes place, and what support is provided. There is lots of things we can offer them to help them control the situation, even if ultimately we know where the decision has to go. If we do make unilateral decisions without consulting the young person, we risk reinforcing the very message that coercive control has taught them, and that is that they're not in control. And obviously, coercive control shrinks a young person's world, right? So our role is to expand it again intentionally and consistently. And sometimes that begins with something as simple as just offering multiple seating options in your office. And when the young person enters that environment, they can just choose to elect to sit in the spot that feels most comfortable to them. So that's kind of shaping the physical environment just to start that environment of autonomy for the young person. Kind of that decision-making environment starts with the physical environment. And these micro choices matter. They are practical, everyday ways of rebuilding autonomy. And that restoration of agency is, in my view, the most important part of working with children and young people who've experienced coercive control.
Thank you. No, I really like that framing of understanding and restoring agency. I certainly think that that's something which we need to centre in our work. So thank you for sharing that. So given all that you know in your work and from your own experiences and that you've just shared, what do you think are the most effective and supportive ways to ensure that children and young people's voices are heard?
So again, a big question. Obviously, the first step is making sure that young people understand their rights, obviously under domestic law, and we know that that's evolving, but also under international frameworks like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. A rights-based approach like this reinforces autonomy as something that they don't need to earn through compliance with adults, but it's something that they inherently possess. And in fact, when I was a young person, I still am a young person, but prior to entering the sector, I didn't actually know about the Convention on the Rights of the Child at all. I only found out about that once I entered the space professionally as an advocate. So we really do need more education around those rights-based frameworks so young people do know inherently their rights. I guess when we're supporting young people, we need to hear their voices both at the systemic level and at the individual level. So at the systemic level, that's things like implementing true co-design principles and designing systems for young people with them. There's a pretty good theoretical model of this, which is Hart's ladder of participation. And it kind of tracks the various models of youth participation all the way down from like manipulation and tokenism to kind of those more true co-design principles. And there's about 8 rungs. And, the level of input the young person might have is kind of variable. But the point is being very transparent with them, recognizing where you're at with that ladder of participation. So they're not entering a space thinking that their voice is going to be actually heard, and then it's, just tokenistic or whatever. And there's lots of other theoretical frameworks as well, but that's kind of how we can implement young people's voices at the systemic level. More so on the individual level, I think this is something we're pretty good at as a sector, and that's obviously validating language. We've talked a little bit about that in the introduction, but language matters a lot. And if language can be a tool to implement coercive control, it can also be a tool to help young people recover from coercive control, or to potentially to not get into those situations in the first place. So holding the space to listen, not always to provide immediate solutions, that can come later. The first step is just holding space to let the young person really share their experiences. And obviously seeing victim survivors as survivors in their own right, even if they are young people, not just as part of the family context. You really do kind of need to see both sides. But yeah, I think on the whole, our sector is pretty good with validating language at the individual level. And at the systemic level, it's just implementing prevention at every stage, not just acting after harm has occurred, but obviously implementing those national principles for child-safe organizations, so we know there's preventative efforts happening, even in spaces where harm's already occurred. If we're still implementing preventative practices, that means that more future harm might not occur. Obviously, we know re-victimization statistics in Australia are pretty insane. So prevention doesn't stop once harm has occurred. It needs to continue throughout the whole process. I guess that's kind of my overview of individual versus systemic young people's voices. But yeah, it's obviously a big topic.
Yeah, thank you. No, it is a really big topic, and one that I think would benefit from a lot more consideration about how we genuinely provide space for children and young people, and then listen and then act. So I think they're great points. I have one more question for you, if that's okay. So one of the things that we certainly see in our work, and I think people working with children and young people also see this quite commonly, is around the tech facilitated harm. So from your experience, what does that actually look like or feel like for children? What sort of experiences do they have in the tech facilitated abuse space?
Yes, obviously tech facilitated abuse is kind of the area that I'm working in the most at the moment. It's both my lived experience area and kind of my professional experience area as well. And I think the most important thing to recognize is that technology doesn't put a distance between a young person and their abuser. It doesn't matter if they're kilometers away. Technology isn't putting that as a distance. It's actually closing that distance, because you've got your phone with you at all times. You know, you're being monitored at all times, potentially. You can't physically escape by walking away. A lot of people have the misconception that coercive control or abuse through technology is somehow less severe because there is physically that distance, but it can actually be the opposite, because that distance in practice is basically closed. You have your phone with you at all times. That can look like, obviously, isolation, withdrawal, risk-taking behaviors. We've seen a lot of those things already when we were talking about presentations. But I suppose what it feels like to be the young person in that situation, it's kind of like a suffocating fear that permeates everything you do. You do feel like you're kind of always being watched. Doesn't matter, if they're on the other side of the country, you kind of feel like they're always there. And then you're always on edge, heartbeat racing, that kind of stuff. So you do see the same kind of physiological responses that you would see from potentially more in-person physical abuse. And it's really important to recognize that when dealing with young people who've experienced tech-facilitated coercive control, is that a lot of the presentations can be similar, but then there's that added nuance of, obviously, there's going to be a level of technology involved in their lives at all times. How can we kind of manage that?
Definitely, and I think what we're also observing is more so when coercion and control is used in kind of peer and intimate partner relationships is where it intersects with image-based abuse and threats to share nudes and the control in that way. So in addition to sort of the tracking and monitoring, the other ways that we see that. So I'm not sure if that's something that you're also looking into, or if you have any comments on that.
That's a very evolving legislative landscape as well, image-based abuse and AI-facilitated abuse as well.
Yeah, it really is. And I think I know there's a whole lot more changes that are commencing from the 9th of March with additional protections around access, like age restriction around various access points in the global internet spaces, whether that's search engines or generative AI. So I think it'll be interesting to see what that means for the way that we work with coercion and control and collect evidence in those spaces. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insights. I can see that your personal experiences and the work that you're doing across many, many different forums and engagements is just extraordinarily helpful, and we're very grateful that you've been willing to share that with us today. So thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you. All right. I would now love to welcome Gina Johnson to our session. So, hey, Gina, on the screen. Excellent. Hey, Gina is the program manager at Barnardo's Australia within the safety and prevention portfolio. She leads a team focused on early intervention and supporting women, families, children and young people who've experienced family and domestic violence. Gina has extensive experience across the early childhood and social welfare sectors in Western New South Wales, and she's passionate about strengthening community connections and ensuring that children and young people and their families are supported to thrive within their communities. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, Gina.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I'm going to start by asking you, based on your experience and current role, what is most important in supporting children and young people who've experienced or are experiencing coercive control within the context of family violence?
Yeah, for sure. I think the most important aspect of supporting children and young people who are experiencing coercive control is to ensure that the practice is child-centred, safety-focused and perpetrator pattern focused, while strengthening the child's relationship with their non-offending parent. So just in my current sort of experience and leadership role, I see that children are not passive witnesses to family violence. They sort of are direct victims who adapt and respond to environments created by coercive control. So I think this means like it's critical that practitioners understand children's behaviours, emotions and coping strategies as survival responses rather than problems to be fixed. I think a key priority is ensuring that the practitioners and caseworkers consistently identify and document the pattern of coercive control and its impact on the child's daily life, like emotional well-being and development. This sort of includes keeping the responsibility for harm with the person using the violence rather than unintentionally placing blame or shame on the non-offending parent, like supporting and strengthening the protective capacity of the safe parent is one of the most effective ways to improve safety and outcomes for children. Like as this relationship is often the primary source of stability and resilience. I think like equally important is ensuring that children's voices are heard in ways that are safe and developmentally appropriate. So this could involve creating opportunities for participation through play-based approaches, relationship-based engagement, and just ongoing conversations. Also, while being mindful not to increase risk or place children as loyalty conflicts. So as a manager, I'd sort of like to support the caseworkers through lots of reflective conversations, to build their confidence and like maintain that trauma-informed lens and ensure like their assessments or conversations and interventions remain focused on the child's lived experience. And I think like finally, like supporting those practitioners, like we need to support them themselves is essential. Like working with families experiencing coercive control can be complex and emotionally demanding. So providing that reflective conversation and supervision, clear frameworks, such as like the Safe and Together model, and strong practice guidance ensures that staff are equipped to respond effectively. So, because when our practitioners feel supported and confident, they are better able to support children in ways that promote safety, healing, and long-term well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. Great points there. And I think that I think having those sort of frameworks and tools, which also give us that common language, so that we're working together across agencies, is also really vital. And I certainly I like the framing around how we work in recognizing those perpetrator patterns, and then how we communicate that. And I think something that you may wish to reflect on this is also how we do that in a way that we also, as we discussed a little earlier, make sure that for children and young people who are using maybe coercive or harmful behaviours, but also experiencing it, how do we do that in a way that doesn't leave them with labels or stigma? Like, I feel that those spaces are really, it's a really challenging piece of work, I think.
It is very complex.
Really complex. Okay, thank you for sharing those insights. Now, what are some of the complexities of children and young people as victims and witnesses in situations of coercive control, and how do you work to address those complexities?
Yeah, I think children and young people living with coercive control experience significant complexities. I think because they are both direct victims of abuse and witnesses to the harm caused to their non-offending parent as well. So just through some experience and supporting caseworkers, like I've seen that the coercive control affects children's obviously emotional safety, their development, their identity, and relationships in a way that is often invisible but impactful. So one of the key complexities is that children are not passive observers. They actively adapt to survive in an environment shaped by fear, unpredictability, and power imbalance, I find. They may become, as you've said before, like hypervigilant, emotionally withdrawn, or take on protective roles within the family, such as comforting siblings and attempting to reduce the conflict. So I think these survival strategies can be misunderstood as behavioural issues rather than recognised as adaptive responses to trauma. So sort of we need to address by sort of supporting the caseworkers to use that trauma-informed and safe and together lens, helping them understand and document children's behaviours as meaningful responses to coercive control rather than deficits within the child. I said another complexity is the impact coercive control has on child's relationships with the non-offending parent, because the person using violence may undermine that parent's authority, create fear, or manipulate the child's sense of loyalty and trust. This can affect the attachment. It also and that emotional security and the child's ability to seek comfort. So working with the caseworkers to recognise and strengthen the protective actions of the non-offending parent, ensuring they are supported rather than blamed, shamed, as this relationship is often the most protective factor in the child's recovery and well-being. I think children's participation is also complex, as they may be fearful of speaking or may not have the developmental capacity to articulate their experiences as well. So helping support the practitioners really to engage children in developmentally appropriate, safe and relational ways, including that play-based engagement, observations and ongoing conversations. This ensures the child's voice is included in a safe space without increasing risk or placing them in as the loyalty conflicts as well. There are also system complexities. So where responses may focus on incidents rather than patterns of coercive control, or unintentionally place responsibility on that non-offending parent. So as a manager, it's to address this by also getting back to supporting the caseworkers, just reflecting on and having conversations, guiding them to keep the perpetrator's pattern of behaviour visible, and supporting clear child-centred documentation and risk assessments. Yeah. So, and it is, it's just about supporting that practitioner as well and keeping them focused, because this approach helps create safer, supportive environments where children can begin to recover and thrive. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for reflecting on that, and completely understand that piece of work that it sounds like you and your team are doing around supporting the supporters and actually ensuring that your team can both recognise it but also look after themselves in kind of exploring that with children, because I know that the impact of working with children and young people is enormous. And I think as we know more about this and we start to join the dots ourselves as we have new language and new tools, has a huge impact. Are there any particular big challenges that you've identified in supporting children and young people?
Yeah, and I think, look, because our focus is on a lot of reflecting and working hard and supporting and advocate for the children and the non-offending parent, because as you know, like I'm out in Western New South Wales, and it can be anywhere. So sometimes the services are not quickly available or accessible. So there's a lot of work we do in that space. Quick, early, supportive, after hours. So yeah, that's another challenge.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's a good point, isn't it? That it doesn't just happen a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
No. Yep.
And I think when you are in community or, small community or rural, regional, remote, people often have a different expectation of your availability.
Yes.
So I understand that. Look, thank you so much for those important reflections. I really, really appreciate that contribution to this discussion. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks.
Okay, and now our final speaker today is Jo Campbell. Jo is the General Manager at DV West. She has worked in the domestic violence and sexual assault sectors for over 30 years and in various roles as a manager, policy advisor, educator, advocate and counsellor. Prior to DV West, she was the director of the Education Centre Against Violence, and I'm sure all of you have done some training with them in the past. She's passionate about systems change to enable victim survivors greater opportunities to access justice and healing. Welcome, Jo, and thanks for your time today too.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks for inviting DV West onto this important webinar.
Great organisation with significant experience over a long period of time, so very appropriate, Jo. Okay, so given your experience and your current role, what are your practice priorities in supporting children and young people who've experienced or are experiencing coercive control within the context of family violence?
Thank you, Carolyn. It's been great to hear everyone talk too. It was nerve-wracking being the last person, but it's actually really been really useful. I was just give a little bit, before I answer that question, give a little bit of a background about DV West so everyone can kind of see our work in the context that it comes from. So we operate 5 specialist domestic and family violence refuges and outreach programs in the Western Sydney and Nepean Blue Mountains areas for women and children escaping domestic and family violence. Now, this includes the Wirrawee Gunya service, where we have 2 dedicated refuges for Aboriginal women and children that are run by a really skilled Aboriginal manager and really skilled Aboriginal specialist domestic and family violence practitioners. So last year, we supported 2,086 survivors of domestic family violence, and 971 of those were children and young people. So we've been lucky enough to have a children and young people's dedicated program sitting at DV West. And last year, we were able to support 348 children and young people in that program, and almost nearly all of them benefited from our holidays and activities program. Overall, 47% of those kids identified as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander. Now, we have 4 dedicated children specialist workers. 2 of them are Aboriginal, identify as Aboriginal, and they work closely beside mum and mum's domestic family violence specialist practitioner as well. So the model is very integrated. Now, we've been lucky enough to have embedded the children and young persons framework for domestic and family violence practitioners. This is embedded across all our organisation, not just with the children's specialists, but our other DV specialists. And this framework was first developed in 2015 by Kat Gander, who is our CEO. And she's just refined it. She's built on it over time and just refined the fourth edition of that framework. And we are actually looking at piloting that training this year. So please, everyone, keep your eyes out for that one. But what I wanted to say about the children and young people we work with is that all kids are impacted by the perpetrator's pattern of coercive control. Many have grown up in home environments where there's fear, lack of safety, intimidation, unpredictability. Many of the kids we see, they're at serious threat. So the perpetrator has been on the local safety action meetings, and we get those referrals. We tend to get about 80% of referrals from local SAMS meetings. A recent evaluation, well, we did the evaluation a few years ago of the children's program, and about 30% of the kids that are engaged in the program have got open child protection case files with DCJ. And around 76% are still having ongoing unsafe contact with the perpetrator, even when mum has been forced to make that difficult decision of removing the kids from the home and from the perpetrator. So one of the things about the framework is that we aim to really build on protective and resilience factors, and reduce the risk factors. So that's kind of the big objective. And it's been heartening to hear the other speakers and yourself, Carolyn, because one of the main things that the framework lends our focus to is that we're really trying to identify the incredible skilled and creative way kids and young people survive the violence and cope with the violence, and not to see that as a negative, not to pathologise them as the problem, but to look at that as a strength, and to actually engage in real work that actually focuses on building on those strengths and resilience. So 3 of the practice principles that the Children Young Persons Framework prioritises. The first one is lifting the context of children and young people's lives into the foreground of our practice. And that really resonates with what some of the other speakers are talking about too, that from the framework perspective, is that we can't assume that by supporting mum, this will have an automatic flow onto children. Because growing up in an environment of coercive control, this can cause kids to actually feel invisible, it can cause them their needs, their wishes to be utterly dismissed and not acknowledged. And we don't want to replicate that dynamic in our work. We want to reverse that, which is why our children specialist workers engage children really quite early in the work, and start the case planning process with children themselves, children and young people themselves. So this allows kids to have a safe place to talk about what their concerns are, what they feel their strengths are, what they feel they're good at, and what things do they want to do? What activities do they want to do to actually build their confidence and engage them in community, and engage them connect them with other people and connect them with their families. So that's the first principle. The second principle is establishing a therapeutic environment where kids and families can restore their connections, their stability and healing away from the violence. So repairing relationships that have been disrupted, we've all talked about that have been disrupted by the perpetrator's coercive control. Those relationships between the child and their mum or their main caregiver, or the child and their siblings, and the child and their extended family and community and culture. That's a huge part of our work. We support families. I mentioned the holidays and activities program, and that's a big part of our work, is creating opportunities and resourcing families to spend time together. like like supporting them to go on a small holiday where they can actually have fun, create happy memories. Often what we get blown away by the feedback. Often kids are saying the best thing about, they've done all sorts of different activities, but the best thing about the program was actually seeing mum smile and seeing mum laugh or crack a joke. So that's an incredibly important part of that particular principle. We support families to put in place routines such as meal times, homework times, sleep times, family outing, going to sports events, building that routine and patterns back into family life is really important, because often the perpetrator has actively disrupted those routines and created a sense of unpredictability. So we're trying to build that back in to restore that autonomy and to restore that sense of control back for children. One other thing we do in this part of the work too is having conversations about kids, about their kids, about their families. What are they proud of about their family? What do they cherish about the family? What are they like doing with their families? Like to harness a sense of, often kids when they've grown up in these environments, don't actually see their family as a source of pride, because those conversations aren't happening. We're trying to really build that into the work and do that very early on in the work, because often we're only, on average, we work with families for about a year, sometimes longer, or sometimes it's a bit shorter. But we've got a year, and 1 year in a child or a young person's life goes really fast. So we try and get in early, of course, at children and young people's pace, but try and work out what they want. So the third principle, I'll move on to the third principle, which is really important, and I know Jenna just mentioned it before too, and this principle is about empowering mothers and carers as agents of change in their children's recovery. We always have mum or the carer in the driver's seat. We're positioning them all the time as the person who knows their children best and who cares for their children most. We're also actively seeking information about their protective efforts and their parenting strengths. And often what's really important is within that is to unpack the perpetrator's pattern of coercive control, and then also unpack mum's or the carer's parenting efforts and strengths. And then you get to see how amazing those parenting efforts are when against the backdrop of the perpetrator's pattern of coercive control. So I hope that makes sense. Sorry, my hands are a bit blurry because I'm using my head, so stop.
Not at all. No, thank you. That really made a lot of sense. And I think that's actually what people really value, is having frameworks and structures around guiding their work and giving their work meaning. And so you can see, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is the journey I'm on. And this is what the other services are doing at the same time with their child or that family. Yeah. Are there any other frameworks that you might flag that could support specialists or general practitioners to identify coercive control? Is there anything else that you might use in your work that you would recommend?
Thanks, Carolyn. I just wanted to add to the children and young persons framework. We do adopt a developmental ecological case planning model. So that means we look at a broad canvas of the developmental ecological model to look for risk and harm factors and build the protective and resilience factors. So we're looking at the child and their individual characteristics, their developmental progress, and their connection to culture. Then the second layer of that is looking at their immediate environment. What was home life like? Where did that how did the coercive control play out in the home? And look for the detail around that. So then when we're building, transitioning families into safe housing, we can build some of those things in to address the coercive control that happened in the family home, in that immediate environment. We look at relationships, not just relationship with mum, but relationship with other carers, siblings, and the extended family, and culture, community, elders, and also aunties and uncles. So making sure, because often when you address the coercive control and build those relationships, that allows for more space for other extended families that weren't able to come near the family because the perpetrator really made sure that there was a lot of isolation and disconnection going on. Then the fourth layer is really engaging kids and young people into their community. So working with the school environment, getting mum and the children to actually really engage and transition into new schools, but actually working with that environment to make it a safe place. Enabling kids to get back to their religion, get back to their culture and their community. And also supporting kids to engage in sporting events. Often kids start up a football, engage in a football team, a netball team, do art classes, whatever it is that child or young person wants. We try and really support them and resource them to do that. And that's the focus. The efforts are there, and that because that actually builds a lot of community around the child, but also a sense of achievement. We just had one young fella join a choir, and he was just sang at the Sydney Opera House in the choir. So things like that are enormous for children and for their whole family. So yeah, sorry, I've probably gone over time there.
Not at all. No, thank you. And I think that's amazing, and it's really important that we stop and reflect, I think, on those little wins along the way and how much they mean to children and young people. I think I've had similar experiences where you might just say something off the cuff which compliments a child on some aspect, and they'll stop you in your tracks and say, no one's ever said something like that to me before. So I think we really need to collectively reflect on that and also just enjoy that when it happens, because so much of it's so heavy. So when you get those opportunities for a kid to sing in a choir, that's really awesome. Love hearing that. But well, thank you for your comprehensive response, and I think people will be very interested in the tools you're using, and something we probably didn't get to touch on, but potentially if there's materials you can share, might be just ways that you document and map that work. Because I think part of it, record keeping, is so important, particularly when you're dealing with families in legal processes or court proceedings. I think and that's something for another day. But I think if there is information that we can share with people who are connecting with the resources around this webinar, that would be very helpful. So thank you very much, Jo. Really enjoyed all of the panelists today, and I think I've learned a lot, and I'm very heartened to hear about this, the really amazing piece of work that's happening around. I tend to only see a very small part in the legal space, but I'm very excited to hear about all these programs and approaches that are being used. So thank you. Now, we're moving on to some questions and answers. We've covered a lot of content today, but we have a little bit of time left for some questions. You can use the Q&A function, which I can't see, but I know it's out there. So if you can find it, please pop in a question if you have one. We do have a question that has come in that has been sent to me. Right, now this is to all the panel. If you're keen to answer it, please just pop on and answer. What are some practical and age-appropriate tools or strategies we can use for engaging children in conversations about their experiences? So who might be keen to let us know about some tools or strategies they're using in talking to kids? Okay, Jess, hand up, love it. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, me again. I was just going to say, like, one of the things that I find is very, very important when you're, talking to young people about their experiences, never make any assumptions, because kids can just throw absolute curveballs. I guess, obviously we've talked about a lot of really serious stuff today, but I suppose making more of a light example is that when I was a kid, I came home from school one day and I was talking with my little sister about how nobody likes the Virgins at school. They always get bullied. No one likes the Virgins. And my parents were obviously understandably extraordinarily stressed. They were like, what do you mean no one likes the Virgins at school? That's like, what's going on? These kids are 4 and 5, right? Like we were little. And then they didn't make any assumptions, though. They kind of interrogated very gently. And turns out we were talking about vegans, not Virgins or virgins. And obviously that can be kind of the same in a lot more serious circumstances. It works the other way around, and we should never assume something based on what a young person says. They might say something that they think is completely harmless. It might sound completely harmless, but kind of always just look a bit further. Don't make those assumptions verbally, because what the child might not know that they've experienced abuse. They might be kind of explaining things and they don't actually know. They're not at a stage to recognize that that is harmful. So never make those assumptions. Let the young person lead the conversation, and then privately, in your own space, kind of make those interrogations. But yeah, when you're kind of talking to a young person, never assume anything based on what they're saying. You kind of, you have to let them lead the conversation like that.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Such a great point. Definitely taking time to ask for examples and for further clarification. Just checking, did anyone else have any other tools or strategies they might like to share in relation to the ways they engage with children?
Well, I think, hi, Carolyn. I don't know if anyone wants a bit of early childhood sort of play-based. I think we just need to provide those play resources, I suppose, that supports that emotional expression, especially for children, in that 0 to 5 or 0 to 6, and regain their sense of safety and builds trust. And so a lot of free play with toys is really good, like drawing and painting feelings, and puppet play is always really good. Books, like emotional cards with faces, and a lot of therapeutic storybooks, and a lot of sensory is really good as well. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. I actually think as a practitioner with probably a little bit of vicarious trauma, I need that too. So you can run some groups for us as well. That sounds amazing. Thank you. Now, Jo, we have a question just following on from your contributions earlier. What could we do? How can we work to build a sense of pride for children who don't feel it? What could we be doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, with the framework that we apply in our work is we're starting from scratch, because we're trying to build that rapport, that trust. So kids and young people actually have an opportunity to express what they want and what they would like to have happen in their lives, similar to what Jess was really focusing on, making sure that they have a dedicated, and that's the model that we work from. They have a dedicated children's worker to sit and plan with them about what they want to see happen in their life, what they want to do. Often children have got, all children and young people always have ideas that often have been squashed down by the violence. Having a space for them to actually open up and discuss what they want to do. Of course, that takes a little bit of time to talk through and to think through, particularly when there's been a lot of threats, a lot of living in unsafe situations. But it is amazing how quickly kids can come up with ideas and things that they actually want, really specific things too, like I want to join a cheerleading group, or I want to actually learn how to draw in a certain way. Like there's specific things that we go with what they want, and that can actually create a huge sense of pride. If like what I was saying with the child going to be a part of the choir, or even join. We had one young 10-year-old boy joining a football team after an incredible experience of the perpetrator undermining the way he looked, calling him weak all the time. And then within a short space of time, our children's worker engaging with him and also engaging with mum's caseworker, yeah, he was able to join that football team and join his school community. So listening to what children actually want to do and then acting on it, really acting on giving them and empowering mum to give them the opportunities to do that, develops an enormous sense of pride quite quickly.
Yeah, thank you. That they're all great ideas, and I agree. I think taking time to recognize and celebrate those things and give that feedback to kids, I think that's a lovely approach, and I think that centers me a little bit of my work to be thinking that way when I'm working with kids, like picking out the good things they're saying in addition to all of the tough stuff that we need to respond to. So I think that's really lovely. Okay, thank you. We also have a direct quote / question. So thank you. So we recognise that children are victim survivors in their own right and that they are subjected to the same patterns of coercive control as a non-offending parent. But the coercive control legislation is typically framed around intimate partner relationships. And so how is intimate legally defined in this context? And is it limited to sexual romantic partners, or can it include familial relationships such as parent and child? Yeah, thank you. And that goes to the heart, I think, of this training and the work that we're doing. Absolutely, coercive control can happen in any relationship, whether it's the sexual romantic intimate relationship or a parent-child relationship. But for the purposes of the New South Wales coercive control offence, it only applies to that sexual romantic intimate relationship where the person using coercion is at least 18 years old. The person that might be experiencing it can be under 18, but the person using it needs to be an adult. In other states, there have been slight variations in the way that the offence applies to other types of relationship, for example, in Queensland, and that is definitely a space where there will be future consultation around how you might expand the coercive control offence to apply to other relationships such as parent-child. In saying that, there are other protections still available in the normal family violence space, and ADVOs and child protection contexts would still recognise harm in a parent-child relationship, but the coercive control offence won't apply at this stage in New South Wales. There is also a direct quote here and a question. So how can we best support children and young people that have experienced coercive control in their home growing up to ensure that they're best supported to not repeat those behaviours when they enter their own adult relationships? So I'll throw that open to the panel if anyone would like to talk about some of their work or their experiences in supporting children and young people to be able to break patterns of behaviour. Any keen beans? Oh, Joe, camera's on, good. Thanks, Joe.
I just wanted to say about that, and it goes back to the Safe and Together model, which we have all trained in at DV West, that if you're unpacking the perpetrator pattern of coercive control and violence, rather than just saying, you take the word gaslighting, what does gaslighting actually mean for what that perpetrator did? And unpacking the pattern gives the family a really clear sense of what they experienced. I think that has been a really incredible tool that we've implemented within the children's framework to make sure, because understanding the pattern is really important to be able to address him. So kids and young people actually see what they've been up against, and then they can make different choices about how they may engage in those similar patterns. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you. And look, unfortunately, that was the last question. We've run out of time, and apologies to the people who've submitted questions that we couldn't get to. As we flagged a little earlier, we will provide responses to additional questions with the pack that comes out in relation to this webinar. So look, I really appreciate we all do here with DCJ, CCWT, the panellists and the people behind the scenes all appreciate the contributions of those that have spoken today and those that have attended, engaged and asked questions, really thoughtful questions, and they've been responded to very comprehensively in the moment. And so, yeah, please remember that we will include responses to those unanswered questions. So you've probably got a quick minute to pop one in if you still have any questions you would like us to get back to you on. So now, as we wrap up the webinar today, I'd really like to thank our speakers once more. I can do my little silent clap. Others, I'm sure, are very grateful. I know we can't see everybody attending today. I really appreciate the time and expertise. And as I said, from a siloed perspective of being in the legal space, it's very exciting to hear what's happening in other professions and sectors working with the same group of children and young people as we strive to keep them safe and break these patterns. We've explored some very specific needs of children and young people in terms of understanding and responding to coercive behaviours in multiple contexts. There's many more things that we could discuss, and we look forward to suggestions and feedback in the survey link that will be coming your way as to what else it would be helpful to have training or opportunities to discuss. I would like to take a moment just to reflect on some of the key takeaways. I think very much like the idea of what we can all do collectively to take time to identify and amplify the agency of children and young people and of all ages. I think certainly in our work we have very young children, 8 and 9-year-olds contacting us independently of their parents to tell us they don't feel safe at home and they're wanting some help from a lawyer. And I'm sure in all of your professions you're also working with young children with big ideas and big voices, and we need to work together to listen to them. I think it's that genuine respect is something that often children haven't experienced in other aspects of their lives, and particularly in households where there is coercion and control. It is also really important to look to not just the domestic landscape, but also the international frameworks and really centre a child rights informed approach to our work. And I'm sure we're all doing that in our own ways, but to continue to reflect on that and to think about how we can do that in terms of participation and privacy, I think, is another big aspect of children's rights that we probably need to all do some work in that space and remember children do have a right to privacy in certain contexts. Also, incredibly important comments have been made by the panellists about how children and young people may not actually recognise the harm that they're experiencing, the patterns of coercive control, and we need to reflect on their descriptions, the language they use, and they often give little hints and throwaway comments, but they're the ones that we have to chase up and take time to actually say, could you tell me a little more about that? Or, you know, have you got an example of that, or how did that make you feel? I think just think anything we can do to help them to feel like we believe them and we're creating that space to have those conversations. I think that's particularly important for children who might be worried that they've done something wrong themselves, and I think or have been threatened by a person using coercion and control, that they will get in trouble if they say anything. And so that does take incredible skills and patience to create safe spaces for children to talk about their experiences and to trust that you're a safe space. And I know for those of you that are mandatory reporters, there comes that additional layer of responsibility to understand those reporting obligations and make sure children understand them and can make an informed choice about the information that they choose to share with you in that particular moment, understanding that they may then lose control over the situation as statutory authorities through child protection and police may have to become involved. I think there's some great tools that have been discussed, and I think Joe and Gina mentioned some of the tools that they use in their services, and it would be great to have spaces to continue to share those. And I suspect a lot of you have done Safe and Together training, which has really helped to create that space for some uniform language and understanding of what we need to do collectively to best centre the actual needs of victims, survivors, and not let the narrative be dominated in a way that's deficit-based. So I think that's also incredibly important. So I think there's lots of other reflections we could make, and perhaps some of those will be included in our response that we send out to questions. As we've mentioned throughout, we're pleased to provide a comprehensive digital resource pack, which includes links to support services, resources, and further reading. This webinar will be made available for later access, so please keep an eye out for the link in an email. Thanks again for everyone for joining us today. Together we can make some meaningful steps towards addressing coercive control and supporting children and young people, victim survivors, in their journey to safety and healing. And as flagged a minute ago, final request, please take some time to complete the feedback form. Feedback is really important. There is a QR code on the screen. Send through your feedback, even if it's just, we didn't get to this and I really want to know about something. That's all incredibly helpful for us to understand, you know, the directions that future training need to take. This will also come out to you via email. So again, on behalf of CCWT, thank you. And we wish everybody a great afternoon, and really thanks for your attendance and for centering children and young people.